All right, Pez fans, welcome back to another exciting episode of Here's What's on Pez. Right now, I'm about to show you my latest project build. This is the Chapter 2 KOKO from the guys at Chapter 2 Bikes in New Zealand. It is my latest project build, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what's on this bike before we get into what is going to be super cool, and that is an interview with Mike Pryde, the guy who owns the company and designed this bike. Now, before we roll that tape, I will tell you a little bit more about the bike. The frame is the KOKO by Chapter 2. This is their Aero Road Race frame. I did a really cool unboxing of this thing a little while ago. Riveting stuff live on YouTube. I'll put a link to it down below because you can still watch it and enjoy it. Frame is an aero design, aero shaped. We're using truncated tube shapes, which is really cool. We talk about that in depth in the interview that's coming. Group set. We went with the Shimano Ultegra Di2. Very nice group set. A lot has been written about it. It's been proven at the highest levels of racing. It is excellent. It goes onto the bike seamlessly, works flawlessly, lots of great designs. I mean, Shimano, I can't tell you anything more really about Shimano than you already know. They're building excellent equipment. We've done a lot of reviews of their stuff on Pez. You can check some of those out. But they have a lot of very good stuff at a lot of different price points. This is their second from the top, of course. Di2 is their top line. Ultegra sits down below that. So more affordable, but performs really just about as well. I mean, I would challenge you to be able to notice the difference on how this performs versus Di2. Up front, we went with the Chapter 2 Mana Handlebar. That is their arrow-shaped integrated carbon bar. Does a very nice job of taking care of the tube, the cables, running them internally so you don't see them. That's one of the things I really like about this bike is how all the cabling disappears. Very sleek, very nice design. There's not a cable sticking out anywhere except for a little tiny wire at the back for the rear derailleur. Everything else has gone internally. You can't even tell it's here. Super sleek, super cool design. I really like this about modern bike design. Next, the wheel set. Also provided by Chapter 2. Now they have a lot of experience building carbon fiber frames. They decided to extend that experience into providing their own wheel set for people who really wanted the whole Chapter 2 package. So this is a 45 millimeter depth. They call it the C45 REHI race wheel. Arrow shaped, it's been molded and shaped in the wind tunnel. Chapter 2 has a ton of experience in the wind tunnel because their original business was sailboards under the Mike Pryde name. Learning how to design sailboards to work in the wind, you got to spend a lot of time in the wind tunnel. So they have a lot of experience about that, and that's all come together in this bike. One thing I like about this wheel set is the 21 millimeter internal width, which allows you to run a wider diameter tire. I like to run 28s myself on my road bikes, but you can go much wider. I'll show you that as we get a little bit more into this. Since I started riding wider internal widths on my wheels, probably about 3 years ago, I have not had a flat tire. Tires, we went with Pirelli P0 races on this. Very nice tire. Nice finishing touch here. Cages by Arundel. They also make excellent bar tape. I've got this very cool design here. I haven't put it on yet because I wanted to really have a closer look at the Mana bar and show that to you. But once this goes on, ooh, it's going to be a really slick looking design. So that's going to be cool. One more thing, the saddle up here provided by Scott Bikes. This is their Tofino saddle. It's really cool actually. It's got built-in design for attachments at the back. You can clip in an onboard rear light, which I think is really cool. Super great safety idea now. Something we should all be riding with. It'll take a bunch of different attachments, including a fender, a saddlebag. It's actually a really slick design. I haven't seen anything like this before. It's about time somebody came up with that. All right, so here's the bike. Here it's ready to go. Now we're going to get into some more in depth on how this bike came together. I'm going to talk to Mike Pryde. We did a really cool interview. Here we go. Let's roll that tape. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. I am here with Mike Pryde of Chapter 2 Bikes. We're going to have a little technical talk about this bike right behind me. It is the KOKO. And I thought there's no point in going into this on my own. I've got to ask the guy who knows more about this than anyone else on the planet. That's Mike Pryde. Mike, welcome to Pez, and thanks for talking to us.
Hi, Richard. It's good to see you again. It's always a great conversation that we have. So, yeah, looking forward to this one. I'm Mike Pryde. I am the CEO and co-founder of Chapter 2 Bikes based here in Auckland, New Zealand. So the KOKO really is the second generation aero bike that we've designed and developed. The first one was the RERE, which we launched in May 2018 and was actually one of our best-selling models for quite a time. So the KOKO is our fully integrated aero road model.
And I tested that RERE back in 2018 when it came out, and it's no surprise that this bike has a different name because there's a lot of differences between the two bikes.
Yeah, when we designed the RERE, we took a very different approach. I mean, these were the days when most aero frames were using camtail technology. So camtail is where the tail of the aerofoil shape is truncated to provide stiffness while still providing an aero advantage.
And for people at home who aren't necessarily sure what a truncated tail looks like, if my fingers up here are the front of the tube, the back half is kind of flat. Like the tail's being cut off. Essentially, from the full aerofoil shape of a wing, like we would imagine, the back tail has been kind of cut off, so it's flattened now.
So the truncated solution is a really, engineering kind of efficient way to get the stiffness and the aero benefits in a system that works together.
So can you talk to us a little bit about percentage of loss of aerodynamics do you get when you truncate the shape of that tube?
So the way it works is that when you truncate the tail on an aerofoil shape, such as what you might see on a Toyota Prius, where the tail is very, very sharply cut and blunt at the rear of the car, the air is actually cheated into believing that the tail is still there. So it actually doesn't detach, right? So when you have a little bit of disturbance, because of a change in the shape, the air detaches. And when the air detaches, that creates turbulence and that creates drag. So by having a truncated tail, you actually don't lose a lot of aero benefits, but you still get the full width and the stiffness that you want in the structure.
It actually works because it's science.
Yeah, I mean, and the stiffness benefits are massive, right? I mean, if you compare the RERE with the KOKO, we're getting huge benefits in bottom bracket stiffness and in head tube stiffness. And that results in a bike that's going to steer well, it's going to go downhill really confidently, and it's also going to be stiff when you put that pedal down, to get that power into the rear wheel.
One thing I want to talk about the stiffness around the bottom bracket and the stiffness up around the head tubes. And we've seen this now for a number of years where brands are saying, oh, it's the stiffest bottom bracket ever. Is there a possibility it could be any stiffer than it is?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about stiffness is that it's actually something that's very difficult for anybody to really feel, right? So when we design a bike and we quote a particular weight is something that people can actually feel and touch, right? They can pick up the frame, they can put it on a set of scales, and suddenly there's a number that they can relate to. But with the terms of stiffness, there are so many different variables, right? So you could have a super stiff frame, but then the wheels that you use might be not so stiff laterally. You might be running, 30 or 32 millimeter tires with low pressure, and suddenly that bike's going to feel very different. And I think what we've really achieved with the KOKO is that we've designed the frame to kind of really work in two different sections. So the lower section, from the head tube structure all the way down the down tube to the bottom bracket to the rear wheel, that is all about performance. It's all about driving the bike forward, right? So the stiffness through the camtail design, the carbon fiber that we use, and all the technology that we put into that really creates a stiff platform so that every watt that you put through the pedal is translated into forward motion. But then when we look at the upper part of the frame, which is the top tube and the seat stay and the seat post, this is where we actually want to design a bit of compliance. So the KOKO actually has a really unique feature, which is an adjustable compliance in the seat post. By simply moving the seat clamp in one of two different locations, you can get up to an 8% difference in terms of compliance. And here in New Zealand, where we don't seal the roads, because we have so many country roads, the roads can actually be quite rough. So I'm always riding 30 to 32 millimeter tires, and I've got the seat clamp dialed in with more compliant position, and it's super comfortable and super plush. But what we really want to try to do with this new feature is to actually give the people the ability to do what they want. So you can have it super stiff if you're riding on really smooth roads, or if you're riding on less smooth roads like we have here in New Zealand, you have the added benefit of dialing in compliance when you need it.
It's the first time I've seen that system employed to anchor the seat tube, but also to be adjustable, offer that adjustability in compliance. And I think it's a pretty slick design.
Yeah, when we design anything, right, we always start often with something that's way more complicated than it needs to be. Adding complexity doesn't add value to the customer, right?
Let's go back to the frame and areas of stiffness and compliance.
But what we did with the KOKO, which is really interesting, is that we have an entirely separate mold just for the front triangle, which we mold a piece of latex. And the latex is a much firmer material, which we use as the mandrel, which we wrap the carbon fiber onto before we put it into the stainless steel mold. And this controls the thickness of the carbon fiber with the resin in a really, really finite way. So there's almost no excessive resin flow. And in fact, if you were to shine a torch inside one of our frames, it's silky smooth. It's very, very smooth. So that means that every bit of carbon fiber, all the 350 plus plies of small carbon fiber that we put in there, is put to work in basically hitting the KPIs that we want for stiffness and for weight. So if you look at the comparison between the KOKO and the RERE, I've got some numbers here in front of me now. So the head tube deflection is actually 35% stiffer on the KOKO than it is in the RERE, and that's a significant number. So when you're going down a hill, when you're descending, or you're out of the saddle sprinting, it's going to feel like a much more stiff platform, right? And then in terms of the bottom bracket, it's almost, it's 13.35% stiffer. So these are numbers that we've been able to achieve using these new ways to process and manufacture the frames. But of course, if you just made the frame with a stiffer head tube and a stiffer bottom bracket, and you forgot about the compliance, that bike would actually be very harsh to ride and very uncomfortable. And what we actually do during the manufacturing process is that before we actually paint our frames, 100% of our frames are put onto a jig, and we measure the head tube stiffness, bottom bracket stiffness, the weight, and also the stiffness of the dropouts, so left and right, front and back. So all of that data is recorded, and we have certain KPIs to meet. And if the frames don't meet those KPIs, those frames that actually get painted and don't end up becoming a final product.
Can you give me some temperature and pressure numbers on how hot does that thing get to, melt everything together and cook this thing into a frame like this?
Yeah, well, it actually varies between different frames, right? Because there's also how long you actually leave it in the mold. And I actually have to get back to you on those numbers. But generally speaking, it's a 1 hour process of preparing the mold, which means cleaning the mold up from the previous frame that was in it, putting the carbon fiber in there with the mandrel, closing the clamshell, going into the heated press, and being heated up and then removed and taken out of the mold. So it's a 1 hour process. So
we're living in an age where the technology now is so good that it's less of an advantage than it used to be, because there are so many brands that have very good technology. So
there's actually not a lot of bad product out there.
So Mike, the bike that I have built up here has got all internal cable routing. I used your Mana bar, and the cables are all beautifully hidden inside.
Yeah.
But you guys have done an option where if you don't want to run that kind of stuff, you can actually do a couple other things. So you're not locked into this kind of bar. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much since from day one, right, of the whole kind of ethos and culture around Chapter 2 was all about, bespoke builds, right? And bespoke builds comes back to giving the consumer choice of what they want and how they want it based on preference, bike fit, budget, or whatever gets them excited, right? So pretty much every frame that we have designed, you have the option of buying a Mana bar, whether it's an internal cabling one or a fully integrated one like the KOKO. So the KOKO, for example, you can do all the cables internally, either with mechanical or electrical group sets, but also you can put a standard stem and a standard handlebar on there. And the real kind of the logic and the reason behind that is that, we as a pretty small boutique brand, we can't go out there and produce 15 to 20 different sizes of handlebars, right? We've got to be quite economical about how we manage our inventory. But at the same time, we recognize that, people do have their personal preferences in terms of a handlebar that they've been riding for many years, or they have a fit requirement that we just cannot meet. So therefore, we've designed a system where one of the spaces that comes provided with the frame set allows you to put the cables and the Di2 wires and so forth exiting just underneath the stem. And that allows you all the freedom and flexibility to get the fit that you want.
Nice to have some choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important because at the end of the day, as a company, we sell frame sets, right? So when you buy a frame set, you've got this product that you have the full kind of blank white piece of paper to go out there and do all the things that you want to do. You can choose the wheel sets that you want, the saddle, the wheels, the components, everything, right? And that's kind of really our ethos. And we really kind of stand behind that. But at the same time, the interesting thing is we do recognize that, in countries like in the USA, people are more tuned to buying a complete bike there's a couple of reasons for that. I think with offering a complete bike with a price on our new website, which is coming soon, people will get a finite price that they know for this particular price. They'll get a product which may be an Ultegra or SRAM Force. It gives them that peace of mind, because I think often people think that, oh, if I buy a frame set on its own and it's put together as a project, the price becomes crazy. But actually, it isn't, because our philosophy has always been, our frames are fairly priced. Suddenly I've saved, 2,000 or 2,500 compared to one of the famous brands. It's like suddenly, oh, I'm going to go for a dual ace, or I'm going to go for a nicer set of wheels.
What's it going to cost to buy one of these bikes? Wheel sets?
Why don't I talk about the frame sets only, because that's kind of where we're coming from. So as a brand, if you buy, the KOKO on its own, the frame set, which is excluding the Mana handlebar, it's between 2,849 to 2,999 US dollars, and the Mana bar is another, it's another 450 US dollars. So it's a pretty good deal.
Oh, there's one thing I want to ask you about too, and that is you guys are famous for the beautiful finishes on your bike. Now, this one behind me might look a little subdued in this kind of beautiful white with a bit of a pearlescent, almost gray tone here.
Yeah.
But I know this is something that you guys have taken a lot of pride in, creating these bikes that are really beautifully finished and look really different from a lot of other things on the market.
Yeah, I think this was pretty much, in the Chapter 2 DNA from day one when we were developing the business model. And, having spent, quite a few years at the Mike Pryde brand, and seeing all the challenges that you have to try and break into a very, very competitive market, we really needed to discover, what a unique selling proposition was. So there was a couple of things that we developed. One was that we were going to be a frame set only business. We wanted people to have the choice of building up the bike the way they want. Affordability was important for us as well. But the third thing was the paintwork, right? So in a marketplace where there's a lot of brands which are producing just black frames with a big decal on there, we felt that a big point of difference was the emotive side of why people buy products. And I think that's something that a lot of these brands don't talk about. Maybe the Italian brands and European brands talk about it a little bit more, but there's this fixation with just about racing and engineering. But when you boil it down to, people really want a great product at a fair price that really kind of gets them excited to go out there and ride the bike. And sometimes I often have a conversation with the end consumer that has been looking at the KOKO or the TOA, and they're a little bit undecided about which model best suits their needs. And the normal response that I give them is that, the one that you think when you come out in the morning and you're going to see it in the garage and it's going to get you all G'd up to go riding, that's the one you should buy. So I think this comes back to the point of why we put so much effort into the paintwork. And that paintwork is actually costing us quite a lot of money, but we felt strongly that by developing these really unique, almost storytelling paint schemes that we have, it's a really strong point of difference. And the fact that each colorway is produced between 150 to 200 units as a limited edition creates that sense of exclusivity, the ownership of one of our frames. Yeah. So I think that's why we do it, and it's worked extremely well. And certainly people are very proud of owning these really cool colorways.
I like the limited edition factor here where, you're getting something that not everybody else has. And once it's done, and you've got one. Those are all good reasons to own a Chapter 2, I think. Thanks for joining me on this conversation. It went, as always, longer than I thought it would, but there was never a dull moment, it seems. So,
yeah, thanks, Richard. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to actually seeing it.